Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, everybody, sorry. Welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet of Portsmouth City Council. Usual housekeeping things, there's no fire alarm planned. If there's a fire alarm that goes off, we need to treat it as real. Please use stairs, not lift, and assemble by Queen Victoria. We're live streaming at the moment, is that correct, Joe? There's nobody here who is not a council person to be told that they don't want to be filmed, but I think it's sensible if we introduce ourselves, if we go around the table. David, do you want to start?
David Williams.
No, you need to push your button, otherwise you don't get recorded, and people won't think you're here.
David Williams, Chief Executive.
Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Peter Rolfe, Deputy City Solicitor.
Joe Moore-Smith, Democratic Services.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Deputy Leader of the Council.
Gerald Van Jackson, Leader of the City Council.
Jeanette Smith, Resources.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environment and Community Safety.
Ben Dowling, Cabinet Member for Planning, Regeneration and Economic Development.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing.
Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation.
Susie Horton, Education.
Rob Wood, Cabinet Member for Children and Families.
Alison Jeffrey, Director, Children, Families and Education.
Luke Stubbs, and I'm here to make some points on behalf of the Conservative Group.
And we also have Fiona from the news, and I'm terrible with names, David from Democratic Services, who's trying to make sure that the live stream stuff works well. Okay, folks, thanks very much. Apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Matt Winnington, who is away. Declarations of interest, colleague. Any declarations of interest that we need to record? No. Record a previous meeting on the 9th of October. Colleagues, are you happy with that?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Treasury Management Mid-Term Review. Jules.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report recommends some minor updates to the Council's policy on the providing for the repayment of debt, which have arisen following a recent changes in the minimum revenue provision guidance from government and following discussions with our external auditors. The purpose of the amendments to the current Treasury Management Policy are to set out the action the Council would take in the event that the market value of its investment properties fell below the original value of the unsupported borrowing used to purchase them in the first place, and for the Council to also begin to make minimum revenue provision on equity shares over 25 years where the funding was also funded by unsupported borrowing. Members are asked to approve the changes included within the recommendations, to note that there have been no breaches in the Treasury Management Policy so far during 2018-19, and to note the indicators included in Appendix A.
Thank you, Jules. A question for me that arises out of that is, I'm not going to mention figures, but I understand that the value of the properties that we have, that have been bought through the fund, is now lower than the price that the City Council paid for them in capital value, including the fees that went into them. What then happens then?
Sorry, Chair, the value of the properties is actually higher than the original purchase price of those properties.
Not according to the papers that Chris Ward has given us. No, in which case we'll go and look at them again, as Chris isn't here.
The value, it's my understanding that the values of properties is higher than the original purchase price, as was reported at Cabinet at the last meeting.
And that report showed a value there which was lower than the price paid. But anyway, we'll have to go back and look at that appendix and look at that.
Okay, but to answer your question, Chair, in the event that the value of the properties is lower than what was originally than the original purchase price, the difference between the value and the purchase price, we would begin to make MRP provision over the life of the asset.
Okay, and I've also had a query from Councillor Ian Lyons of the Conservative Group, who was concerned that the policy that we had in terms of the capital investment fund was that we weren't repaying any of the principal. We were effectively doing it as an interest-only loan. His his view is he thought that we were aiming to hold the properties long term. My understanding was from Chris was that we were expecting to move them round with an average life of about 5 years, which is why the decision was made to not pay off any of the value of the property and just effectively pay the interest.
That's exactly correct, Chair.
Okay. Thanks. Colleagues, are you any further questions on this paper? Colleagues, are you happy with this? Okay, thank you very much indeed.
That one's going to council.
Yep, I think almost everything is. Okay, thank you very much. Next item, Healthy Child Programme Future Commissioning Arrangements. Alison, welcome.
Thank you. This report looks at what the council should do when the current contracts it has for public health nursing services end in June 2019. It puts forward 3 options, a competitive procurement exercise, the bringing of the services in-house to the City Council, and the third option, the development of a Section 75, that's Section 75 of the 2006 NHS Act, partnership agreement with NHS Solent, who currently provide the services. And the report recommends that we go with the third option of the Section 75 agreement with Solent NHS Trust. The arguments in favour and against each of the 3 options are set out in the paper. Essentially, an important part of the background is that a lot of work has been done already in integrating services and strategy across the City Council and Solent for children's services that they provide. And the Section 75 partnership agreement builds on that work, provides the best opportunity for accelerating it rather than disrupting from it, or potentially, in the case of the in-house delivery, raising issues around recruitment and retention for the workers in the service. I wasn't proposing to talk at any greater length on this, but obviously very happy to answer questions on it.
Thanks. Luke.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to say a great deal on this one. It's one of these things that I'm just in the room, so I thought I'd make a few comments. Yeah. I do think that looking to place a contract with Solent is the correct way to go. I think that in the health and care economy that we have, that all of these organisations are interrelated, that problems in Solent do affect the council. Our budgets have links between them, even if a lot of them are implicit because they're through the CCG, but then, if the CCG has financial problems, they ripple through to grants which are made to this council, which do not have to be made. So I think that it is the right way of going to look at putting this service to Solent and keep that going. I do, just looking through the papers, I was surprised to read in there about the notional savings target of 200,000, which I actually think is quite unambitious given the financial constraints the council is operating under. You can't really look at budgets, and they'll include the public health budget in this year by year. You have to have some idea of where you're going to go in 3 years' time, for an example, 3 years being the length of this contract. And we know in public health that you're going to have to be looking at a savings, maybe, well, as far as we know, 1.2 million plus anything to support the general fund, and I would suggest it's more likely than not that you will need to make savings beyond that in order to help the general fund. And most of that budget, most of the public health budget, goes in 3 big contracts, of which this is the biggest. So, this is, you can't ring fence everything, I guess that's what I'm saying. And I have to say, I think that in order to make all of this stack up, maybe not this next year, but certainly over the 3 years as a whole, that greater level of saving than that is going to be required.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that, Luke. And I think you're probably right. As you know, the government cut this year to the public health budget is £470,000. Whatever ministers say in London, they're going to continue to cut the public health budget, even though they say they want to transform the NHS from looking after people who are ill, to trying to get people not to be ill in the first place, an audible ambition, but then their actions are that they then cut the public health budget, and we will have to work within that. So you're right, we may have to continue to look at this, but it seems a sensible place to start. Rob.
And I take that on board, and in fact that was part of our discussions with several of my colleagues, including the CCG and also NHS, the Solent as well. I think it's an important thing that we set a realistic saving target to begin with to see how that manages, and in the future, in future years, we'll be looking much closer at that. So thank you for that comment.
Okay, colleagues, any further thoughts on this? Jeanette.
Thank you. It's probably might be a question to Alison, or it might be a question to Jules. In 7.4, it says about the financial implications on the Section 75 agreement, and the financial arrangements related to that agreement will be clarified during the development. Is there any initial thoughts of who would hold the budget for Section 75?
I think all that is to be looked for, but in my view, it makes sense for that budget to be held by the Council as the commissioning authority here.
Best answer. Thank you very much.
Jules, are you happy with that?
Yes, indeed. If we get control of the budget, that was a good outcome for the council.
Okay. All right. Colleagues, are you happy with that? Let's move on. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the income generation strategy. Jules, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Income generation forms an important part of the medium-term financial strategy, and until now there has been no standalone income strategy. It is also a strategy in its broadest sense, which seeks to generate income not only from commercial activities, for example, but also income that can be generated from other sources such as regeneration, for example. The strategy encompasses a range of activities covering the short, medium and the long term, and sets out a strategy to optimise the income through commercial activities, through government engagement, and by improving the local economy through regeneration and housing delivery. The detailed income strategy for 18-19 and beyond is set out in Appendix 1. Members are asked to endorse the proposed strategy and the underpinning financial framework for onward approval by City Council.
Thank you. Luke.
Thank you very much, Leader. I think it was interesting in the last item when you were talking there about the property portfolio, and I've seen those numbers because they were distributed.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was to everyone in the council or I've certainly seen them. And you know, it has made a profit, and the value of those assets is greater than the purchase price, and that is an income generation strategy. What we're looking at here, I suspect, is a cuts first strategy. I'm not really surprised by that. I mean, I've not been surprised by that ever since you canned the energy company. And I think that the Cabinet meeting where you took that decision, some of the rhetoric was quite revealing, because there were members of the Cabinet who were making points that basically it was wrong to make a profit, and that you know, all council operations should be not-for-profit, and somehow if that's not the case, then it's immoral. Well, that is the definition of a cuts-first strategy, because you won't have any income generated unless you make a profit somewhere. It was, looking through the report you're talking there about, I mean, the big idea seems to be social housing. Well, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't add up. I mean, just think it through for a moment. The cost of building a medium to high-rise property is about £2,000, or just under £2,000 per square metre, about 1,900 or so. And you're looking at 60 square metres for a two-bedroom flat, it's £120,000. You have to put 5% basically offset against that, because you've got 3% for the debt cost, and you've got to pay for the asset over 50 years, 5%. So that's £6,000. Then you've got to add on to that some allowance for maintenance, you've got to add on some allowance for servicing customers, so £8,000 I would say is a realistic break-even cost. An affordable rent is £7,200, and the social rent is not much more than £4,000. So you'd be taking on £8,000 of debt in order to generate £4,000 of income. That's not a profit, that's a loss. And you know, we've seen some of this before. I mean, back before the Conservative administration had to make 40 million in savings over 4 years. So back when you were in the previous time, there was 40 million more in the budget, 40 million. And yet we were still in the position of closing public toilets. And why? Because there wasn't an income generation strategy. There wasn't also an efficiency strategy either. What there was a cuts first strategy. And I'm afraid we're going to go back to that. I mean, I've seen over this last 6 months spending commitments made by this council in respect of, for an example, community wardens or a substantial pay rise for social workers, and not one penny has been set aside to pay for any of that. The plan seems to be just to take it all from reserves, but reserves are finite, and while a lot of good work has been done over the last 4 years in getting the reserves into a decent state, they really won't last that long. Under these circumstances, and when the money runs out, you're back to a cuts first strategy. I mean, just on the housing thing, just before I finish, I mean, last December, I went to a meeting with Vivid Homes. It was a lot of people were there. I wouldn't want to call it a conference exactly, but it was like an evening meeting, various people spoke, including Gavin Smart, who's the Deputy CEO of the Chartered Institute of Housing. And someone asked him a question, so they asked the panel a question, but he gave the clearest answer. He said, is it possible to build affordable housing without a subsidy? And his one-word answer was no. And that's without thinking about the right to buy and social rents. So, you know, I don't think this, I think we used to have an income generation strategy. It involved the property, involved the energy company. You're moving away from that. It's cuts first, and I'm quite concerned about it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be able to introduce this as the first time I think this council has had an integrated and thought through income generation strategy, as opposed to the sort of scattergun approach that we've had over the last few years. And I thought it was really important that instead of doing a scattergun approach where things are not joined up in any way and where things are done in secret, that we have an open and transparent income generation strategy that the council can look at in a whole variety of areas, and where this council tries to learn from other councils around the country on what has worked for them. So I'm very pleased that this strategy is looking at driving income coming into the council and building on a very long-term tradition within the City Council here, entirely cross-party, so that the City Council has invested in creating the ferry port, a highly profitable income generation decision. I know it was saved from being sold off by just one vote in the council chamber. The Lord Mayor's casting vote saved it from being sold off. But there's been a long-term investment in the city to try to make sure that we can produce income. What I hope this report does is it pulls it into a whole. So the areas we're looking at are long-term investments. We're looking at how we get money in from the government by bidding for various funds, and the council has done that for years, but this pulls it into an overall strategy. It looks at building on the income generation strategy involving purchase of properties around the country. My memory, Luke, is different to yours, and we'll have to go back and check that piece of paper, but my memory is at the current level, it is the properties that have been bought are producing an income, but their capital value has fallen. But I think that what we wanted to do was to look at other and new areas. So we're interested in investing in areas within the city to create income for the council, but also to regenerate those areas to make them economically vibrant. We're also interested in investing in creating housing in the city. Affordable housing, yes, but also other sorts of housing as well, whether that's at social rents, affordable rents, or private rents and going into the private rented sector. We also want to be looking at how we could invest in properties to be able to make key worker housing so that we can address some of the huge shortfalls in the city for skills that are desperately needed, and where the council and others are having to pay over the odds to recruit people and therefore costing the council money, where we might be able to provide housing and attract people in so that we don't have to pay over the odds. And also I think we're looking at doing investment into local companies to drive jobs so that we can have a strategy of investing in Portsmouth, not investing out of the city. So if we're able to create wealth here in the city, create jobs, create people on decent salaries, that's really good for the whole city. And if we're able to invest in companies to be able to do that, that is a good thing. So I hope the council accepts having an overall strategy for driving more income to be able to protect council services from cuts and to build on good work that's been done by all administrations under all parties over many years. And I hope that finds favour. So that would be my introduction to that. Darren.
Thank you, Gerald. I would support that approach. This is actually a balanced income generation strategy, which looks at the needs of the city as a whole and not just the needs of the few. You're absolutely right, Joe. One of the things that is affecting the ability of people to stay in this city is the fact they can't afford the homes that exist. They don't have that much money at the end of the week, and therefore it is our job as community leaders to try and ensure that we can retain people within this authority and elsewhere, and that is why homes people can afford actually matters. And it can generate income. I'm concerned to hear that the Warden's proposal, which partly falls within my remit, is, I think, not a single penny has been set aside. I'm concerned about that because partly from my side of that has come from an efficiency whereby we are not paying private companies to do the work of the wardens, and that is a significant reduction on the amount we can spend there, which can then go towards the funding gap that the housing service finds itself in, courtesy of the madness of the 2015 government policy. So I'm interested in the balanced approach. I want to, as I said when we discussed Victory Energy at the Cabinet meeting, I'm interested in investments that will generate money pretty early on, rather than when we have to wait for 2024 or 2025 to get anything back on our investments. And that's what we must support and do. That's one of the reasons that when we talk to the officers, they're very keen about the property investment strategy that you talk about so well. So we have a balanced approach here, which is designed to generate and bridge a funding gap. However, Julian, there are a couple of questions and clarifications which I have in what is otherwise an excellent report. I want to start on page 41, which is an interesting approach, which I think may need to change to reflect the priorities that the city has given us. In Strand 1, you talk about transforming to an entrepreneurial council. I think if we are to bring people forward, I would respectfully suggest, Gerald, that we change entrepreneurial to a creative and innovative council. It creates the same sort of thing. Because the idea is to encourage people to think differently, do different things, so that we can actually bridge the funding gap that we've got, so that we don't get to the cuts first approach, which I don't believe this paper does, but which Luke outlined. And I think we have to encourage people to be creative and innovative, and that's not purely around bringing money in, it's about becoming more efficient, which is one of the things that Luke said. In paragraph 4.8, which is on page 42, you talk about the reset of the business rate baseline in 2020-2021. We know again from the discussions we had around Victory Energy that was a crucial period, as Chris Ward outlined to us, when we are at our most sensitive when it comes to income generation. Have we got any idea for any further forward, Julian, on that?
At this stage, no. They're still out on the fair funding formula, and they're still formulating on that, but they haven't started consultation upon it. We are expecting to hear something, hopefully in December, as part of the settlement.
I think that would be very helpful to us as we finalise our approach towards sensitivity. Then my final point is on page 58, which is a factual point, Julian. On page 58, and I think this will also go a large part towards dealing with Luke's issues around building homes, we say we're going to lobby or apply for additional freedoms for the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, in order to finance a new social housing building programme. Given that the borrowing cap was scrapped on the 29th of October, may I respectfully suggest, Gerald, that this point is scrapped as well?
Julian?
Yes, I think you're quite right. I think
I don't at all.
well, from the perspective that the housing cap has been scrapped, then...
But Julian, you may be able to help. My understanding is the Prime Minister has said it will be scrapped, but we've had no detail and no knowledge, and I know that, and it's an incredibly welcome announcement. I've been pressing for it for years, but we haven't seen any of the detail, and some things that ministers announce don't happen. Should we keep this in until we actually know that the stuff has been tabled in terms of redoing? And Luke may know. Is there a timetable, Luke? Has Teresa been talking to you? Okay. Darren.
Well, Teresa hasn't been talking to me either.
Well, I wouldn't expect it.
I would expect her to talk to Luke, of course. Get some sense. I've asked the housing team to look at the details of the housing, the removal of the housing borrowing cap. The borrowing cap in the budget was removed from the 30th of October. However, you are right to say, Gerald, that there are issues around the small print and the details. From the directives which I have seen signed off by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Housing, Communities and Local Government, it looks 150 times better than what it did look. Excellent. But we have to make sure that we see the small print, and when that happens, I will, as I've committed to fellow colleagues, share that around colleagues, Gerald. But you're right, we need to see the small print, but the initial signs are more encouraging than we feared.
Ben.
Thank you, Leader. I appreciate Councillor Stubbs coming along today and providing his view and his group's view, but I thought there's a really crucial sentence that might be worth just reading out. It's paragraph 5.1 of the report, and that's: the income generation strategy proposed within this paper represents an expanded, intensified and strengthened position, going further than current plans, and in particular providing greater emphasis on delivering affordable housing and direct investment into Portsmouth-based commercial ventures. We've spoken a lot over the last few years about how important it is that we invest in Portsmouth, and that might be through something such as the property investment strategy and investment fund, but actually investing in Portsmouth means so much more than that, and I think this paper helps to build that out a lot more. We're talking about housing delivery, which Darren's already spoken about, but actually investing directly into our city's economy, investing directly into Portsmouth businesses and Portsmouth commercial opportunities, and that's the piece that I think really strengthens this strategy going forward, and it's far, far from a cuts first strategy.
Okay. Colleagues, on that point, Steve.
Yes, just to add, one of the other things that's contained in here, which is definitely new and a different approach, what we've been spending a lot of time doing, as the leader alluded to in his opening statement earlier, was talking to other authorities. You'll see mention in this of the potential to use crowdfunding opportunities with council money. We have seen from other councils that can produce a seven-fold return on your investment. Were we able to replicate that in Portsmouth, something like £50,000 bringing in a return of £350,000, and therefore a net gain to local projects of £300,000 would actually turn out to be significantly better than a property investment portfolio for relatively low risk. So I think the message here is that we at the time as a group supported the terms of reference for the property portfolio investment fund, and that continues to produce a return for the council, but it's by far the only game in town, and what we're trying to do is talk to others around the country and learn from where they've had successes and implement those here in Portsmouth.
Okay. Colleagues, we need to send this on to full council. Colleagues, are you happy to send this on to full council, where I'm sure we will have another debate? Okay, colleagues, thank you very much indeed for your time. I think that concludes the meeting. Thank you everybody for being here.